Tracking Beta on the Weather Channel. Still a tropical storm down to 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren here in Houston, where the rain is picking up right now and expecting the wind to pick up eventually as well, with a tropical storm warning in place. Flooding remains a concern. We're going to hear from Reynolds Wolf here along the Texas coast coming up in just a little bit with a first-hand look at some of the flooding, some of that saltwater flooding, some of that surge as we continue to track coastal and inland threats, not just for hours, but for days. It is possible we're going to have a couple, maybe 2.5 to 3 days of rainfall, likely not nonstop, but likely on and off through Wednesday. So the rain's been picking up. We've been expecting it to pick up here in Houston as the storm gets closer and its bands associated with it, with Beta gets closer here to Houston. The bigger impacts have been south, about 150 miles south of where I am, where Reynolds is. Again, we're going to get to him in a little bit. And then, of course, out in Galveston, seeing the combination of the heavy rain and the surge that's coming with it. So the surge comes in, rain falls, can't necessarily get out. It's not going to drain as well. It's sort of plugged up, if you will. So you get some more of that coastal flooding. But rainfall, intensity, duration is going to be another one. So how fast is it going to come down and how long is it going to last? How long is it going to remain coming down fast and heavy? That could lead to flooding. When we look at the expected amount of rain in the coming days, you get a couple of inches, 2 to 4 inches. Areas in yellow and orange, maybe 5 to 8 inches. If you spread it out over 3 days with not a lot of rain in our recent history, we can do okay. Inland, like here in Houston, we hopefully will be all right. Now, coastal areas where you're also getting the surge, you're getting the high tide influence as well, we're going to see more problems. In fact, we're going to be showing you here on Weather Center Live more of the video that we're getting in. We're getting new video into the Weather Channel all the time. We'll continue to update you on the latest on what we're seeing and what we're hearing, what local officials are doing about what's expected. But what we're trying to do is help keep you safe. And by doing that, giving you the forecast so you can make the best decisions possible. And when we say that flash flooding is possible, heads up. You might head out the door and it's dry, but down the road, there could be some flooding. Talk about it's likely when we see areas in yellow on some of the maps that we show you here. That means we are expecting there to be flash flooding. And that is going to be the case here. Tonight into tomorrow for parts of Texas, especially coastal areas, and possibly even here in the southern part of Houston. And then parts of East Texas, and then into Louisiana, and then possibly beyond by the end of the week. Heads up if you live even in parts of central and northern Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. There's a lot still on the table. So with that, let's go to storm specialist Carl Parker. We have a tropical storm still, 45 miles an hour. Carl, what do you feel most confident in with this storm over the next 3 days? And what do you feel least confident in that it could have the bigger impacts?
Well, I'd say for most confident, the fact that it's not going to get any stronger. It's not going to be any more of a wind threat or any more of a surge threat. At this point, all of those impacts are on the decline. However, one thing that we always have to be worried about is just about how much rain are we going to get in localized areas, because you can always have little areas that overperform in terms of rainfall. So here you see the current scenario, and you notice there's just not a lot of structure near the center of this thing. I mean, it really is barely hanging on to tropical storm status, but there is a fair amount of momentum that has built up, and that has certainly caused the water level to rise up and down the coast. We'll talk more about that in a moment. We've been talking about the dry air and the impact that that has had on the center of the system. I think that that is also impacting this rain as it comes into southeast Texas to some extent, because you notice the brighter yellow colors there, robust thunderstorms coming in off the Gulf of Mexico. And as they get up towards the vicinity of Houston, then we start to see some of those colors fading a little bit, which implies that the storms are settling down a little bit. We're seeing more of a stratiform light to moderate rain, where thunderstorms are probably collapsing some, probably because there's still some dry air. Even though it's moistened up at the surface, there's probably still some dry air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, and that's getting involved in some of these thunderstorms. Nonetheless, rain really coming down across a good part of the south side of the Houston metro, so the 610 loop south near the Astrodome there and Pearland, over into Meyerland and Bel Air, and over into Sharpstown and along the 59 freeway, Southwest Freeway. So in all of those areas, it's certainly going to be a pretty difficult drive. And then, looking farther southeast, you see a terrific amount of rain on either side of the Gulf Freeway. So that certainly is where I think there'd be more concern for flash flooding, just because the rainfall rates are a lot higher. In general, it looks like it's going to be that area around the Gulf Freeway, south side of Harris County, and then getting into parts of Brazoria and Fort Bend counties. That's where we expect to see most of the rain tonight, and then it does really drop off as you get farther south and west. But again, as I mentioned, even though the storm is weakening and we're not seeing any sort of big blow up of thunderstorms near the center, you've still got this really big spin. And, tropical cyclones have high what is called inertial stability, which means basically that once they get going, they don't just stop. There's still a lot of momentum out there. And that momentum and all that wind associated with that has been driving the surge threat. It's been a sound side flooding there in Port O'Connor and Rockport. We've seen that for a full day plus. But then farther up the coast, you see it's more of an onshore flow near Eagle Point and coming into Galveston, and that is likely to continue as this circulation slowly moves inland. So, Chris, it certainly could have been a lot worse if we'd been talking about an environment that was incredibly humid all the way around this storm. I think we'd be looking at something very, very different right now. So we can thank that dry air. But, of course, we're not completely out of the woods. We still do have a ways to go yet.
That's absolutely true, and we have the video to prove it as well. With the heavy rain and the flooding and the high tides, especially coastal areas are going to be prone to more flooding. We've already seen a lot of flooding. In fact, I want to get an update right now from Mike Shahan, the director of Scholes International Airport in the Galveston area. And again, we were showing you some of the video from the flooding earlier. And Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. Can you kind of paint the picture and let us know what you're dealing with right now?
Sure, Chris. Right now, with the storm surge and the rain, most of our airports flooded, at least most of the runways and taxiways. But the water's going out now that the tides, has gone out.
Can you set the scene for us as far as the airport, for those that have never been to your airport? You're seeing flooding, you're talking about tides. That seems unusual, I would think, for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the area. You kind of give the lay of the land, if you will, and what you've seen in the past at your airport?
Sure. Well, first of all, Galveston, we're on a sandbar. We're an island. The airport is kind of in the middle of the island. We have water, we're 5.5 feet above sea level. And the Galveston Bay is right on the north side of the island. We're basically surrounded by water. So anytime we have a high tide or a storm surge, it fills back in over the airport, covers up some of the runways and taxiways and so forth like that. So it fluctuates up and down anytime we have a really big tide.
So how much of an inconvenience is this? Who are some of your customers, and when do you expect to get things back online?
Well, some of our largest customers is PHI and ERA. They transport oil-filled workers out to the Gulf, out to the oil platforms. So they're not flying right now. They've had to evacuate all their aircraft and so forth because not knowing what the storm surge is going to do. And then we've got business jets, locals that fly and so forth. So right now everybody's just hunkered down. They've moved their aircraft to a higher ground at different locations, or they're just hunkered down in their hangars and waiting for this to pass.
All right, best of luck to you. We certainly do hope things fare better for you in the coming hours and days. Mike Shahan, Director of Scholes International Airport. Thanks again so much for your time and the update there. We do appreciate it as we're looking at the forecast too, with more flooding possible. And I think with this storm, as it is still moving west-northwest around 7 miles an hour, eventually, by tomorrow morning, it will have taken a new tack. In fact, changed direction and be going now in the northeasterly direction. So with that, some of the same areas like where we are here in Houston, going to have to deal with, if not prolonged rainfall, the chance for rainfall over a prolonged period of time. Could be dealing with some heavy rain even here in Houston for a couple more days into Wednesday, possibly into Wednesday afternoon or later, Melissa. So there's still a lot we know about the storm and still a lot that is yet to be seen, and we're not really going to know until we're into it hours away and then beyond.
And especially the next few hours through this evening, it's going to be where those feeder bands are setting up as Beta moves onshore to who could see the flash flooding. take place. Now, who has the greatest risk of flash flooding? Well, we've been talking about this. The south side of Harris County, down through Brazoria County, Galveston County, and then really all along the coastline, a higher likelihood of seeing flash flooding through the overnight into tomorrow morning as well. And we looped the radar over the last hour, and you'll notice on the south side of Houston, south of I-10, right in here, just north of Liverpool and Galveston, that's where we're seeing some locally heavy rain setting up right now. That will continue on its northwestern, kind of almost due westward track, just south of downtown Houston. So inside that band, we have some rainfall rates that are over an hour, and we'll have to watch out for some localized flash flooding. So let's take you through Houston the rest of the afternoon into the early evening. And again, focusing that heaviest rainfall threat likely on the south side of town, the south side of Harris County, through Brazoria County and up towards the Katy area. Midnight tonight, we'll keep tracking some of these tropical downpours. And then because the storm is so slow moving, we are still dealing with it tomorrow. So we'll be dealing with this flash flooding potential in Houston through tonight, Tuesday, and even into Wednesday. But it's going to be a localized thing where we end up seeing the heaviest rainfall. Now, it's not just Texas and Louisiana on high alert for beta. As we look at the rest of the southeast, a lot of you could end up seeing some heavy rainfall as we look through the next couple of days. That could cause problems in a place like St. Augustine, which already has had some flooding issues, not because of rain, but actually because of Hurricane Teddy and strong onshore flow off of Florida's coast. So that's been something we've been dealing with all along the coast of the southeast, up through the Outer Banks and even into the mid-Atlantic. But for beta, what's going to happen in the southeast is that later this week, as it gets pulled into the direction of kind of Georgia and Alabama, we're going to see more rain. And some of these spots just got a lot of rain in the last week because of Sally that moved through. So again, here's the overall track that beta is going to take. And the end of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's moving up through Louisiana, and the remnants eventually move into Mississippi and even Georgia in that direction. So how much rain is still to come? Well, the European model is pinpointing some areas could end up getting still another 5 to 8 inches of rain. GFS doesn't show that much, but the point is there will be the potential for some tropical downpours Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the southeast, especially as we see beta finally moving in that direction after it makes its landfall later today. So for Atlanta, your timing, you're fine today, you're fine tomorrow. We get into Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday especially, that's when the rain totals start to amount. For a place like Jackson, Mississippi, your time frame is going to be Wednesday into Thursday. Then we get into Thursday night. We should see the last of those thunderstorms starting to wind down. So we're tracking beta, but Carl, we're also tracking Hurricane Teddy out in the Atlantic. And this thing, even though it's going to be potentially, and it is impacting Bermuda, it's also bringing some huge waves and large swells to the coast of the U.S.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how agitated the entire western Atlantic is off the eastern seaboard there. And here you see some of the new video coming from Amelia Island in Florida. This is in northeast Florida, not very far away from Georgia at all. And certainly the beach is getting a workout there, an agitated sea and a very persistent onshore flow, along with wave action on top of that. And so life-threatening rip currents expected for a few more days in these areas. And this courtesy of not just Teddy, but also a system to the north. And so let's give you the latest on Teddy. It is now a Category 1 storm, 90-mile-per-hour wind. You can see the core of the storm passing to the east of Bermuda. So they got in on some tropical storm force winds, but it's actually very difficult for the core of a hurricane to come right over Bermuda. It happens, but it's not very common because it's a smaller area. It's only 21 square miles. Now, here you see where the wind is in the western part of the Atlantic, and it's not just right around Teddy. It's also this vast area to the west and north of Teddy because of the pressure difference between that high that has come into the northeast and Teddy. And so when the atmosphere has a really big pressure difference like that, what it does to respond to that is create a lot of wind. So you have a huge area of northeasterly winds driving down to the coast. That's piling up the water and generating very large waves, 24-foot waves there at a buoy about halfway between Bermuda and the southeast coast. So there are coastal flood alerts in effect from Massachusetts all the way down into Virginia, into Florida. We see some here in the Delmarva in Southeast Virginia and eastern parts of North Carolina. And this, by the way, is also a function of the changing baseline. And when you look at the coastal flood advisories issued by the Norfolk office for that region, you see there were just a handful there in 2007 and 2008. Then they steadily tick upward and really start to accelerate in recent years. In 2018, there were more than 50 days with coastal flood advisories. So that is evidence of a changing baseline. And so we expect to see more of these days with high water along the coast. And let's get back out to Chris in in Houston right now. And Chris, seeing some heavier rain come in. It's interesting when you watch the radar, you notice that it's pretty heavy right along the coast, and then it kind of flattens out as it moves more northwest. And I think that might be because some of those storms are taking in a little bit of that dry air that we talked about that's a little farther inland.
Yeah, well, I'm watching a band that looks pretty healthy right now, so hopefully that does remain the case. But of course, we'll keep you posted live here in Houston. I'm part of an extensive network of reporters out here covering this storm to keep you safe.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
The engine stopped, and he said, no, put it on, put it on drive again, and it goes slow. But it just stopped there. I thought I would pass with it because all the cars were going through, so I figured I would do it too.
And a storm like this, if you're not careful, if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can range anywhere from an inconvenience, and hopefully that's what that lady was just dealing with, just with an inconvenience, or with some bad decisions that could turn into a tragedy. So we're dealing with a tropical storm that has come down a little bit in intensity. It was a 50-mile-per-hour storm with the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. Best estimates now at 45 miles an hour with this system. But it's this, which is picking up once again here in Houston, the rain. And we're getting back into the moderate rainfall right now. The intensity of the rain and the duration of the rain over any specific point, any specific city, any specific home, any specific drainage basin, that is going to be what we are going to have to focus on and watch in the coming hours and in the coming days. We're going to be talking about landfall. Landfall is expected later on, some point during this calendar day, we're thinking. And then it's going to linger in Texas, possibly through a good part of Wednesday. As the storm is moving west-northwest, we're seeing some of the rain bands from it here in Houston. Of course, millions of people here. While we think we should escape some of the worst of the weather from this tropical storm, the stakes are still pretty high with this many people. There's a lot of unknowns with tropical systems. How heavy any individual rain band will be, how long it hangs out. These are things we still need to work out and figure out. And sometimes we don't even know that until an hour or even minutes before some of the worst of that is expected. So with this tropical storm, we want to go now to storm specialist Carl Parker. And Carl, again, we're getting some more of that moderate rainfall here in Houston. And what are you seeing when you look at the radar for us here in Houston? While the northern part of the city has been relatively dry throughout much of the day. What are you seeing? You mentioned that these bands were looking like they may be kind of taking a little bit of hit from some dry air.
Yeah, it's really interesting to follow the radar trends here because, you know, you see this heavier rain that's coming right across the Gulf Freeway and then driving into the Houston Metro. And then shortly after it gets to the Houston Metro, as it moves northwest, we're seeing a little bit of a settling of that convection, which implies that the storms are taking on some dry air, which would not be a big surprise because we know there's an abundance of dry air in Texas. That is the biggest part of the reason why the storm has not been as strong of a storm. And that may not stay that way forever, though, because you've got this onshore flow continuing to drive in. So what it's doing is it's moistening up the low levels, and eventually it's going to moisten up the mid levels as well. And so it may not stay that way, but at least for now, we're seeing a greater intensity to the storms south of Houston. And then by the time they get west and northwest of the city, they're coming down a little bit in intensity. So we'll see how long that holds here. Some of the heavier rain now coming right towards downtown, and in fact, it's going to get a lot heavier where Chris is, just west of downtown in the next few minutes. We also wanted to talk about some of the impacts that are well away from this center of circulation. We're seeing now some wind in southern parts of Louisiana. That not totally a function of the tropical storm. That's also a function of a gradient wind due to a front that is across the southeast. So you've got that likely to continue right through the next couple of days in the north central part of the Gulf, even as the storm is winding down. And there's been a pretty good bit of heavy rain across southern parts of Louisiana. There you see another little mass coming up south of New Orleans. So there is a threat for flash flooding basically from Lake Pontchartrain on west and towards Baton Rouge and Morgan City. And there you see the rainfall to come. We're thinking about 4 to 5 inches in areas southwest of New Orleans in particular over the next day or so. Well, we've been getting some cooler weather in a lot of the country, and here's Melissa with more on that for us.
Yeah, and the first day of fall's tomorrow. We've got 9:31 a.m. fall starts, and while we're still tracking Tropical Storm Beta, we've got some record low temperatures that happened this morning. In fact, in Syracuse, you set a record low this morning, 34 degrees out there. We were at 36 in Scranton. Albany dropped down to 32. Had to turn the heater on there, definitely, and even dropped down into the upper 40s in Washington, D.C. Amazing when you're talking about Reagan Airport being right there on the water. Okay, so here's why we've had this nice fall, taste of fall across the whole eastern U.S. We've got this big area of high pressure, which is also helping to spark up those big waves and coastal flooding on the East Coast, but it's bringing in this cool, dry weather. And that flow's been persisting for the last couple of days. And for places in the southeast, hey, it's still going to last for a bit longer as well. As we look at tomorrow morning, we've got morning lows that will be in the 50s in Atlanta and Nashville. We'll be up in the 40s once again for Charleston, Raleigh, and even 40s in New York City. So a chilly start to the day, potentially even close to some records. Tomorrow morning, Binghamton, New York, 35. Your record is 35 from back in 1991. Lynchburg, Virginia, you could tie your record from back in 1962 of 41 degrees, and then 39 degrees for the forecast low in Pittsburgh. Got to turn the heaters on there. 37 is the record from back in 1997. On the other side of the break, more live reports tracking Tropical Storm Beta.
That's right. I'm meteorologist Reynolds Wolf coming from Rockport, Texas, and this is what 2 feet of storm surge looks like. It is certainly an area transformed where less than 24 hours ago you had plenty of sand, you had families out here enjoying the day, and now families are out and the water is in. And we can expect this water to be a problem not only here but many locations up and down the Texas coastline, perhaps into Louisiana, maybe even into Mississippi and Alabama. In fact, let's go ahead and show you some video from high above that shows the story down below in Galveston. You can see the water all over the place, not only in the beaches, but now moving into streets. Ladies and gentlemen, it only takes about 6 inches of water that can pick up a high vehicle, and those vehicles go from something of movement to a death trap. You want to avoid going through water if at all possible, because not only do you put your own life in jeopardy and that of your family possibly, but also first responders that are coming to rescue you, they are also putting their lives on the line to get you to dry land. But you certainly see the heroic efforts here, taking people out of their vehicles and getting them to safety. It is one thing if you drive through the high water, but we do understand there are times where you don't go to it, it comes to you, and that is going to be a big issue. Think about it, though. When it comes to water, it's one thing when it's on a beach or on a street, but it's altogether different when it goes through your living room. It is certainly the stuff of nightmares and something that we have to contend with as we roll forward in time. Meanwhile, back here at Well, Rockport, we've got the gray skies. We have a pattern that so many of you in the tropics may be familiar with. If you live along the Gulf Coast, you've got these landfalling systems. You often have rain that comes through. It's steady. At times, you've got dry moments like this, but the wind is something that seems to be a constant. One thing to consider also as we wrap up is know that we have a risk of tornadic activity. It has happened in the past, certainly happened about a month or so ago with Isaias going into the Carolinas. Those landfalling systems can produce the tornadoes. They're also often weak. They can produce, again, damaging effects, though, and loss of life. So please be careful if you're out there. Have that safe spot, that strategy for you and your family to get to a safe place, lowest floor, away from walls and windows, if you have that tornadic activity that develops in your area. So be aware of all the risks, folks. For the, best plan of action, keep that plan of action watching the Weather Channel. We'll be with you around the clock.
I'm meteorologist Reynolds Wolf, about 150 miles away from where I am. I'm standing in Houston, which is to the northeast of where Reynolds is. He's dealing with coastal and seeing the coastal problems, the flooding there here in Houston. It's the urban concerns that we're going to be dealing with because of this. This is the heaviest of rain as we have seen since we have been out here all afternoon long. So about 150 miles away, again, from where Reynolds is right now. I'm northeast of his location. We can just kind of take a look here. Buffalo Bayou just off to the left, but just how quickly as we come down and how fast that the rain has picked up. I mean, we haven't had a lot of rain at all until about an hour ago, and it started getting, we've had like kind of a light mist or so, but now it's getting into more of the moderate to heavy category. And just as it's been raining just for, 15, 20 minutes, at this intensity, actually this intensity in about 5 minutes, but at the moderate intensity, we're starting to see more of these puddles. And while this is not going to be, impactful, right? This right here is not a big deal. It's an illustration. It shows you just how quickly water stops seeping into the ground. And what happens then? It eventually runs off. And in this case, where we are here at this park, it's going to run off eventually into Buffalo Bayou, which is right down there. And it is, you can see it a little bit down there, just a little bit of a bend as it's going close to downtown. But imagine this. Imagine miles and miles, neighborhoods and neighborhoods, all like this, draining into their local streams, draining into their local rivers. And in some cases, they all meet up with other local streams and other rivers as well. So it's the cumulative effect. Getting some heavy rain over one neighborhood might not mean a lot, but if you have hundreds of neighborhoods getting heavy rain and all of that water running off from streets and from parks like this, going into streams and rivers, it's the downstream area where flooding becomes an issue. So let's go back to Storm Specialist Carl Parker and that flood threat, Carl. Here, I think it's going to be individual bands, not looking at a widespread issue, at least based on the current forecast, but something else too, Carl. Our forecasts can change, and we've seen that a lot here this season so far, with not a lot of time to make adjustments in some cases.
Yeah, and the atmosphere is changing too. We've talked a lot about the dry air and the impact that that has had on this tropical system. Well, now we're starting to see the tropical system bring in some more humid air, and you can see that very clearly when we look at the instability in the atmosphere. So this is partially a function of low-level warm and humid air. And look at the trend here over the last few hours. You can see how it's steadily driving farther and farther inland. So where you've got more instability, you've got more potential for very heavy rainfall rates. You notice that the rainfall rates drop off where that instability drops off, basically west of Houston, but the instability is steadily increasing. So the rainfall is going to get heavier there in Houston through this afternoon. We'll have much more on the storm coming up in a moment.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Tracking Tropical Storm Beta here on the Weather Channel and live right here in Houston. Seeing some of the heaviest rain we have so far over the past few hours. And it hasn't been raining very long at all. We took a look a moment ago where it might not have been as super obvious of all of the quick rise in water. I'm talking about like a hyper-localized area. We're talking about puddles. In fact, I'm going to show you right here, just in this park, up from the grass where we are, where you don't have grass, so the blades aren't hiding this, not hiding all of the water that just quickly starts to go up. Now, we're talking millimeters here, not even a quarter of an inch on the ground. It's not a lot. But the point is, what we're looking at here is water that is not being absorbed into the ground. This water right here with, we're in a park here, but this is, similar to some soil that you get out, in surrounding areas. It's water like this, standing water that eventually is going to run off, doesn't get absorbed into the soil. And that is the makings of flooding eventually. Now, if this rain stops, within, another half an hour or an hour, we've got some puddles. Big deal, no problem. But if this rain continues hour after hour and comes down faster and faster, these puddles become bigger. And then these puddles are getting into parking lots. And then these puddles are getting onto the streets, which are wet, and there's a lot of water being kicked up. And all of that water from these puddles to the parking lot to the streets eventually find their way into the local streams and rivers, and that's when we can get multiple different types of flooding. Flash flooding in the streets, flash flooding is from the streams and creeks, and then eventually local river flooding. Right now, Melissa, it looks like that is not going to happen. We're not going to come to that with 2 to 4 inches, some areas a little bit more, but it's not completely off the table either, especially areas south of town with some of these rain bands that are setting up, because it doesn't take a lot here. We've seen time and time again in Houston to see some flooding issues and some problems.
Absolutely, Chris, and we'll be watching that very closely because in those rain bands you can very quickly see rain rates go 1 to even 2 inches per hour. Well, another area of the country that we are expecting some rain to move in, some relief from rain, is going to be in the Pacific Northwest. And you're looking live at Eugene, Oregon, where we are expecting a wet stretch of weather to provide a little bit of relief for wildfires out there moving in midweek. Now, it only took minutes for the home he'd built over years to disappear. The man you're about to meet lost everything when a wildfire swept onto his property and destroyed his home. But what makes Bob Lipkin's story even more devastating is that he watched it unfold on video, powerless to stop it. Now, he's telling his remarkable story to the Weather Channel's Justin Michaels.
It's hard to imagine living through a wildfire, even harder still to imagine losing your house. But can you imagine having the video of it burning? Welcome to the reality of Bob Lipkin.
The way a fire can sweep through somebody from nothing to gone in 7 minutes. It's crazy.
This is the video caught on a small security camera in Bob's front window.
Somebody gave me this little cheap $25, $35 camera that I'd stuck up in a window, and it was hooked to Wi-Fi.
It rolled, capturing every detail. Now, it's important to note, this video is not sped up. This is the North Complex wildfire in Berry Creek, California in real time. The trees in Bob's front yard were 100 feet tall. The flames, even taller.
I mean, literally, I could hardly watch it. I was shaking so much.
A friend of Bob's is a firefighter and sent him these photographs, before and after.
We have a 7-foot bronze grizzly, Mad Max, standing in our front door, and he was still standing. And the 2 stone pillars that held up the carport to the house were still standing. We're going to keep those there.
Now, Bob knows it's going to be a long road before they can ever get back to the property. So he keeps a mantra in his mind he's lived by for all of his 76 years.
I've got a saying that attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. And the only difference, that. I'm trying to keep a good attitude.
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
For more on wildfire coverage as well as updates on the tropics, hey, check out Pattern Storm Break on Snapchat. And for the West, we've been talking about over 3 million acres burned so far this year in the state of California. And in Oregon, it's been over 1 million acres that have been burned so far. But we do expect some relief to be on the way. Now, that relief is mostly going to be coming to Oregon and up towards Washington State, not as much to California. And the reason why is we have a storm system that's going to be moving in. Right now, it's swirling out in the Gulf of Alaska, and it's going to move in by midweek. So you're still seeing sunshine out there in Eugene, Oregon, but as we look towards Wednesday, Thursday, Friday time frame, that's when we are expecting some rain to move in. Now, rainfall totals will overall be in the 1 to maybe 2-inch range, but locally, I think in Washington state, those rain totals could be much higher, around 3 to 4 inches. Now, on the other side of the break, we're tracking Tropical Storm Beta. We've got live reports in the field coming up. Who could potentially see the heaviest rain as we head through the rest of the day?
Good morning. You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Some new video coming into the Weather Channel as we are tracking a tropical storm Beta. This new video from the air showing some of the water inundation here in Galveston, Texas. Getting an idea of the type of flooding that we can see. Of course, Galveston pretty close to the coast, but we're still looking at, it's on the coast, on an island, but it's still looking a few blocks away from the actual ocean itself or the Gulf, and seeing scenes like this. Water inundating the area. And of course, the National Hurricane Center warning people of the danger of life-threatening storm surge. And along with that, we are also seeing more of this right here in Houston. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren reporting live in Houston, where the rain has been moderate to even heavy at times. So we're seeing more of this, more standing water. Now, this is not anything that the city of Houston and the people of Houston can't handle. Certainly can handle this. Some puddles here, some puddles there, some runoff, a little bit of drainage. So this on its own is not a big deal. It's a wet and soggy day here in Houston. The problem is if this continues and if this heavy rain goes for not minutes, but hours. And this storm, as it's still moving to the west-northwest, it's a slow mover. And that's the last thing you want to hear if you live in Houston, in Harris County. You've seen time and time again slow-moving storms and what those can do. Those are the historic ones. Fortunately, this is a slow-moving storm that does not have a ton of moisture with it. There's a lot of dry air around it, limiting some of the thunderstorms, which means we're not getting widespread heavy rain like this. So that may be the saving grace out of all of this. However, that doesn't mean we're off the hook yet. Not off the hook here in Houston or Harris County or any of the surrounding counties until this thing's out of here, frankly. Because with any tropical system, there's always surprises. There's always things that you just can't account for. And Carl, as I'm talking right now, the rain is even increasing in intensity. And as best and as good as the forecasts are when we look at the rainfall and how much rain we're expecting, one thing we can't predict is how people are going to act and respond to the weather.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And you and I have said this many, many times. It doesn't matter what event it is and where it is and when it happens, but at some point when there is flooding, somebody ends up driving through the water because they feel like it's not that big of a deal, not that big of a risk. And of course, we all think that it's a pretty big risk in most cases, especially if you don't know if there's flow in the water or what exactly the condition of the road is underneath that water. So certainly that's going to be among the things that we're watching very carefully through this afternoon. And if you look at this map here, what you see is, first of all, that's the radar superimposed on the instability. We call that convective available potential energy. And basically what that means is, where's the fuel for thunderstorms? And there wasn't a whole lot of it in Texas over the weekend. It was just this huge area of really dry air, and dry air does not feed thunderstorms. But now we're starting to see that more humid and warm air edge in from the Gulf. And as that continues to edge in, that's going to bring us some heavier rainfall rates. And you can really see this in action right now, because you notice the rainfall rates in that area where there is more instability have generally been higher. And by the time you get up northwest of Houston, where the rainfall rates are not as high, you can see that's where we run away from that instability. So the thunderstorm updrafts start to calm down, and you see more of this stratiform area of rain. But certainly there is some pretty heavy rain that's coming into the metro right now. I mean, it's definitely coming down there from the Gulf Freeway over to 288 in Pearland near the Astrodome, over into Meyerland towards Bel Air, Sugarland, and then up across 59, Sharp Sound over into the Richmond area, then over into River Oaks and Katy Freeway as well. All of those areas, we're getting some rounds of some pretty heavy rain, so you can bet it's going to be a difficult drive home, and it would not be at all surprising to see some of those feeder roads filling up here in the next couple of hours. Now, I want to show you a high-resolution model. First of all, doing a pretty good job of showing what's happening right now. That's the first thing that we look at. Is it painting a good picture, a reasonable picture of what's happening right now? We're seeing that. Then we watch this circulation continuing to produce heavy rain, and that's the issue right there. I mean, that we've just gone through 7 hours. I'm going to go back very slowly, and so you'll see here going from now and through the dinner hour and then into this evening right up until 10 o'clock, still raining there in Houston. So if the rainfall rates are heavy enough over some period of that time, then we certainly could be looking at some flooding in Houston. And then after that, into late tonight, it does finally begin to lift up, moves more towards the Piney Woods, and then over towards the Sabine River as well. And we'll have much more on Tropical Storm Beta coming up in just a few minutes.
Tracking a Tropical Storm Beta here on the Weather Channel, and of course here on the Weather Channel, coverage you will not find anywhere else. We do have live team coverage coming to you here from Houston. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren, tracking the impacts, the effects, whether it's the surge flooding we're seeing along the coast, or it is the heavy rain and the threat for flash flooding inland, away from the coastal areas. This is a storm, a tropical storm that is not going away anytime soon. In fact, at least a couple, if not a few days for Texas, and then more states have to worry about all of this. More of this heavy tropical rain with this slow-moving system, expecting heavy rain on and off here in Houston at least for a few days. Today's Monday, then again tomorrow, and it most likely won't be until some point Wednesday, possibly late, before we see any significant threat going down, before the heavy rain threat really tapers off and this thing starts to move away. Just looking at the forecast cone, we see that this threat is going, or the storm, the tropical storm with its threats, going still west-northwest around 7 miles an hour. Fortunately, it's not going 3, 2, 4, 5 miles an hour. At least it's going 7 miles an hour. It is moving, still not moving very fast. And then it's going to make a turn, going from a direction that takes it onto a northwest path, and then it turns and it heads into the northeasterly direction, which means Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and even parts of Georgia could see several inches of rain. What we're expecting here in Houston could range anywhere from 2 inches on the north side of the city, 4 inches, maybe 6, or locally, meaning some pockets where bands set up locally, maybe 6 or 8 inches. You can't take any of these higher numbers off the table, frankly, until it's out of here. Tropical systems have a way of throwing a few wrinkles into the game plan, if you will, stuff that you just can't account for and don't expect necessarily. Now, we can see with the amount of rain that's expected over the next few days what these storms are capable of. In this case, this tropical storm, Beta, that's right, Beta. We've used all of the names on the list for the 2020 season, so now back to the backup list, which is the Greek alphabet, and that's only happened one other time, 2005. So in an unusual season, highly unusual season, record-breaking season that we're currently in, here it is, Beta, yet again, another named system, again named Beta, the Greek alphabet, with the possibility of seeing more flooding, again inland freshwater flooding, and then at the coast, about 110 miles away from where I'm standing, along the coast in Port O'Connor is where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel. And Mike, what have you seen since you've been there?
Well, this morning it's all about the wind now through this afternoon, the wind and the surf. The surge peaked at 3.2 feet earlier. We've had water in the streets near the bay. We're not talking about the pictures like we've seen in Galveston and Freeport and Surfside, but what you see the Gulf of Mexico is out behind me, and then in front of me is the bay going up towards Port Lavaca. So you get a sense of the wave and action out here. And keep in mind, the winds are running at about 30 miles an hour, so we're getting gusts about 40. So this is not even sustained tropical storm force winds, and look what it's doing to the water here. It's heavily agitated like a giant bathtub hitting up against these breakpoints, these breakwaters and these seawalls. But you can also notice that the houses are not in any way, shape, or form going to be affected by the surge. They're also built up on stilts, so boy, you know, we'd have to have quite a surge. In fact, when we talk to the locals, they really don't get seriously worried until the surge gets up to 8 to 10 feet. And again, we topped out just over 3. Now we're down between 2 and 2.5. The tide is going out. We have a low tide around 2:15. Then another high tide late tonight. On the radar, not a lot of rain right now. We've had a couple of bands come in, and the strongest wind gusts we've seen with the bands early this morning, and then a little later this morning, 42 miles an hour. That's what we clocked here. And so the wind is not going to be a significant issue as far as structural damage. It's all about the surge, the erosion on the beaches, Matagorda Beach out on the barrier island, down to Port Aransas. We're back on the bay here, and the rainfall threat. The rain gauge here in town, I checked, just over ½ an inch of rain so far. That's not much. And we're going to watch the center make its move and come on shore and landfall, likely just north of us. So right now we've got a north to north-northwest wind, so it's becoming more from parallel to the coast to offshore. That's going to help with the push of water at the next high tide. But again, as Carl's been mentioning and Chris has been mentioning, there is so much dry air in Texas that is really fighting the dry air. So the rainfall pattern is going to be erratic. We're still under a flash flood watch, but so far as I know, Carl, we haven't had our first flash flood warning. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So far where we've seen the rain, it's come down and moved on, and we went into the storm relatively dry in the Houston area.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mike. And wow, that's a very angry sea behind you there. Thank you so much. And let's take a look at the visible satellite picture right now. And you can see this big spin showing up, even though there's not a lot of thunderstorm activity near the center right now. So the storm is definitely in a declining phase. There's still a lot of what we call inertial stability. There's a lot of momentum that has built up here that doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't just go away. And so the result is that angry sea that you saw there and the water level rises that we've been looking up and along the coast. Now, in areas of South Texas, it's been an offshore flow for a couple of days, so we've seen some really significant sound side flooding there in Matagorda Bay and also in Aransas Bay. That's at Rockport and also Port O'Connor. And then farther north, that's where winds have turned around. It was a northerly wind yesterday, now an easterly wind, and so we're seeing more of an onshore flow and still some significant water level rises in and around Galveston and farther southwest. So an ongoing storm surge warning, and that from near the Sabine River down across Galveston Bay there, down into Matagorda and also into Aransas Bays as well. Talking about the rainfall, it's been really interesting to watch. Mike mentioned the dry air. That dry air wrapping around the east side and then all the way into the north side of the circulation there. And so I think that some of that rain, as it's coming into the dry air, I think there's been a little bit of cooling there, and that has an impact on the amount of instability. So we've got instability on the coast. That is fuel for thunderstorms, and that's where they're bubbling up and getting real strong in Galveston and Brazoria counties, and then just getting over into Harris County. And then after that, as they get away from that instability more towards the Katy Freeway, you see that there's not as much intensity to those thunderstorms there. They're starting to come down as they get west of Houston. Now, that could gradually change. We could see a little more instability building into the Houston area, and so an increase in the intensity of the rainfall. And that really is going to be the worry going forward. How much rain are we going to see for how long? So we certainly could be looking at some pretty intense rainfalls, and that's the case right now, coming across the Southwest Freeway and making its way towards the Katy Freeway. Little bit of a break along the Gulf Freeway, but we're seeing some heavy rain out over Galveston Bay, and a lot more to come. This is a look at the rainfall forecast. You see along the Gulf Freeway there, generally south of I-10, that's where we're expecting widespread amounts of 3 to 4 to 5 inches of rain. And so if it comes down quickly enough, that could easily be enough to cause big problems on the roads. And remember, this is not going to be over quickly. This is a model forecast. I want you to pay attention to Houston right in there, and we'll go through the next several hours, and we see the rain still coming through into 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 o'clock tonight. And so, Chris, that is really the worry. It's in part the duration, but also just how intense are those rain bands as they are coming through the metro there. So getting back out to you, Chris Warren. That really is what we're going to be watching. And as you've talked about before, you know, there's a forecasting element to this, but there's also a nowcasting element to this. We just got to keep our eyes on the radar and see.
Take water very well in some cases. In fact, over here, as I'm splashing around in this water, there's some puddles. It's not a huge deal, but you see it going down and getting into the grassy area as well, which we're going to show you here in just a little bit. But you just get an idea of that. This rain came down hard and it came down pretty fast. So that means that you get the buildup of water, you get ponding on the roads, you get ponding in parks, and eventually this water drains. It's going to drain into local streams, the small streams, or directly into larger rivers, and that all drains into the bigger rivers, and that goes out to sea. But Melissa, we also know one of the problems is when the fresh water, like we have here, is trying to get out to sea, and then the sea is coming in, there's another component to flooding. It's
Exactly.
the surge and the interface with the rain trying to drain out where it gets even worse.
And it takes longer for that water then to drain out. We have to wait until after the storm moves on shore and we see a change in the wind directions as well. Let's talk a little bit more about Houston, though, for your timing for seeing rain bands moving through over the next couple of days. And here's the flash flooding threat through tomorrow morning. And there's been a discussion online about the potential with these oncoming rain bands in localized areas that could potentially see rain rates over the next few hours through about 8, 9 o'clock this evening that could still be over 2 inches per hour. And here's what the radar looks like right now. You'll see this one batch where the rain is still heavy on the southwestern side of Houston, but we'll be watching what's coming in from the Gulf of Mexico back towards here to potentially be our next little batch of locally heavy rainfall that could be moving in. So here's the high-res future radar kind of timing things out hour by hour. Let's push it off forward towards 5 o'clock. You'll notice we have more bands that are starting to move on shore, especially I think this evening targeting the areas just south of I-10, but even into the I-10 corridor, we could be watching locally heavy rain in certain areas, not everywhere. Tomorrow morning, into the day on Tuesday and even into Wednesday, while we see Beta moving that slow 90-degree right-hand turn in Houston, you're still going to be dealing with the potential to get some locally heavy rain, tropical downpours. It's just not going to be a widespread thing. Now, it's not just Texas and Louisiana on alert for Beta, but you know what? Much of the southeast could end up seeing heavy rain and even some flooding by midweek. That could cause problems in some places that got a lot of rain last week, and it could also cause problems in places that have been dealing with some coastal flooding issues this week. Take, for example, St. Augustine, where you've had coastal flooding at high tide, thanks to a combination of northeasterly flow and also Hurricane Teddy well out in the Atlantic. Now let's talk about Beta's path as we head through the rest of the week, because this is not a storm that just moves inland instantly. It's done. slow mover, and it's a system that's going to eventually get pulled into the rest of the southeastern states. And look at this, the last 7 days, this huge swath over Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina that had got over 4 or 5 inches of rain. Well, look where the track of the remnants of Beta is going to be heading, in that general direction. So we'll compare the European versus the American models for rainfall amounts. The European model is showing locally some areas could still end up with another 5 to 8 inches of rain. The American model is also showing we could see localized tropical downpours. It's just a matter of where those end up setting up. So we're going to be watching out for, at a place like Atlanta, Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, the potential for some tropical downpours that could lead to flash flooding. Carl?
Well, new video just into the Weather Channel. Hurricane Teddy hammering the East Coast with big waves and multiple hazards for coastal communities. We're talking about coastal overwash. We're looking at beach erosion, a rip current threat that's extending up and down the East Coast. You see the water flowing freely through some streets in West Palm Beach there. Also big waves crashing on shore in Flagler Beach. And again, that rip current threat is going to continue for quite some time yet. So a couple of things going on here. We're looking at a hurricane that is well offshore, passing east of Bermuda, but that is not the only thing. There's also an area of high pressure to the north, and it's the pressure gradient between those two systems, the difference in pressure, that's creating an enormous wind field. Winds coming out of the northeast there across much of the western Atlantic. That is piling up the water, generating very large waves, 24-foot waves way out between Bermuda and the southeast coast. So we are now seeing coastal flood warnings up and down the coast, some of those in southeast Virginia. And by the way, this is not just a function of what's going on right now. There's also a baseline shift. And when you look at coastal flood advisories in Norfolk, Virginia, you can see just a handful there, 2007, and we were up to 50 in 2018. So certainly a big change in the baseline there. And we want to get out to Mike Seidel, reporting on what's going on in southern parts of Texas. And Mike, you are getting hammered right now.
We are. You can see it on the radar. We saw it coming. This is, I would say, kind of the northwest side of, we don't have a true eye wall or eye, but the northwest side of the core of what's left of Tropical Storm Beta, and where the rain is really coming out is, I'm looking at the trees in the distance, and they're getting rattled pretty good. I have to say the wind gusts here are somewhere between 40 and 50 miles an hour. We'll check the local gauge, but just unrelenting, stinging rain, and you can see what the wind has done to Matagorda Bay behind me. Boy, it is just turned up. And again, we're not right on the Gulf of Mexico. We've got protection from the barrier island. We're going to stay with you from the bay, and more coverage on Beta from the Weather Channel coming up next.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Port O'Connor, Texas, as Beta finally gets closer to the coast. And what we're seeing here on Matagorda Bay is one of these squalls. Carl Parker's on the radar back at the Weather Channel. Carl, we're on the northwest side of the circulation. We don't have a true eye wall, but this is as close as we're going to get with a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm. And you can see what the wind has done, turning the bay into a giant bathtub. We've had these winds since yesterday, but not this strong. These are running at about 30, 35 miles an hour sustained. We've had gusts up over 40. Remember, this is a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm, so we're not going to get hurricane-force wind gusts. That seems very unlikely. But it's enough to blow certainly the rain around. I've seen some palm fronds come down right now, and certainly the wind with these squalls blows harder and steadier. Carl, you can show us the radar, what's coming around the backside of Beta. It does look like it's going to go in north of us here later on today. But so we're going to be on the western side, and we're going to get that wind more offshore. That's going to help the surge situation in this part of Texas.
Yeah, Mike, you've got a pretty good band of showers coming through right now, and whenever you have weather like that, that certainly increases the odds of getting strong wind. And you can see where the center of circulation is. It's right in here. It's very close to Matagorda Bay right now, which is where Mike is. In fact, we can zoom in a little bit tighter. There he is in Port O'Connor, and so that center of circulation is just about on top of him at this point. And we are seeing some thunderstorms developing here as well. So that is what's coming into Mike right now in Port O'Connor, and that is what you see in terms of all that heavy rain and the wind. When you get some storms like that, they're going to transfer more of that strong wind that is off the ground down to the surface. So that's precisely why we're seeing more there with Mike. And getting a look at the wind right now across the Gulf region, gusting to 32 miles per hour. And now gusting to 28 miles per hour in Corpus. So let's get back out to Mike right now. And Mike, this is basically going to be your peak period here for weather effects over the next several hours. And, you know, we can all just thank our lucky stars that this thing took in so much dry air, because if you had a humid air mass all around this storm, I think you'd be looking at a really different situation at your location right now.
Yeah, remember, Carl, how hard it tried several times, especially yesterday, to get it back together. The convection blew up, only to be, the energy gets sucked out of it by the dry air. We talked yesterday on the air how comfortable it was standing out on the coast here, because, all these storms, Louisiana, Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, we were covering the storm, and, the day or two before, the heat index is, 100, 105 even. Before Cristobal on Surfside Beach just down the coast, where they're getting battered. That's where you're going to get the really serious beach erosion. We had a heat index of 112 in Corpus, but yesterday the dew points were 59 to 62. So it was a whole different air mass, more like fall for this part of the world, and that's what's happened. Beta was trying to strengthen, and the dry air got sucked in, and boy, I tell you what, dry air and wind shear are not the friends of tropical systems, but there are friends on the Gulf Coast, and we could use more dry air and shear if we have any more systems approaching, because we've had more than a few that have strengthened rapidly at the last minute, and that's because they didn't have the shear. They had all the warm water, which we have here, and they didn't have the dry air, Carl.
Yeah, Mike, you can see that just as plain as day when we look at the water vapor imagery. I mean, it's just bone dry off to the west there towards the Rio Grande Valley. Moistening up right now in southeast Texas. That's why we've gotten some heavier rain there, but still pretty dry as you get not too far inland. And so, I think we're going to continue to see this kind of thing over the next several hours. And let's take a look at some forecasts here and show you some radars as well. I want to show you right now the center of circulation. And again, Mike is located right here. I'm going to get this little arrow working right there. So that's where Mike is right there. So he is not very far away from that tropical storm. The core of the storm is about ready to come in. But again, you notice the absence of what's around him there. There's just not a lot of weather around him there, but where we are getting some bands, Mike, that's where you're going to get the most wind when you see these little rounds of storms coming through, and there's one coming through Port O'Connor right now.
Yeah, and it's moving down the coast, so we'll see if we get enough rain in a short period of time to cause the Weather Service out of Corpus or Houston issue a flash flood warning, but we'll see how that goes. But again, this is going to be the worst of it here. Look at the wave action, Matagorda Bay out here in Port O'Connor, Texas, and also a big wave concern on the east coast between cold high pressure, record lows this morning in the 20s and 30s, and Teddy going offshore. So not only waves battering the coast here, but for those of you from, say, the Jersey Shore, especially coastal New England, it is going to get really rough later tonight into Tuesday as that swell arrives and then the waves really crank there. We'll keep you updated on the situation on the East Coast, more on Beta, the rainfall impact, and more on the surge too. Stay with us.
Your carpets are filled with memory.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Fort O'Connor, Texas. I am meteorologist Mike Seidel. We are getting the worst of Beta. It's a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm, and just look at Matagorda Bay. Wow, it's like a giant bathtub. Winds now gusting over 40 miles an hour in this squall. You can see that on the radar. Rolling down the beach. Looks like the center may go in around Matagorda Beach, which is not far away. It's about an hour and a half drive, but you've got to go out, in and out, and back to the coast. So it goes into our north, and we get the wind around the backside. That's going to help with the surge. By the way, the peak surge earlier today was 3.2 feet. And we did get water in some of the streets. Not the kind of pictures we're seeing from the Strand area in Galveston, we've seen in Jamaica Beach and the Freeport area and beautiful Surfside, but we have had some streets underwater. And Carl, this is about as hard as it has rained with this squall. It's pelting me, but again, the saving grace, the storm did not intensify. Thank goodness. We could have been dealing with a hurricane. And these winds right now sustain probably, I wouldn't be surprised if these are 35 to 40. Remember, tropical storm force is 39 miles an hour or higher, up to 73, and then you get to the hurricane category. And it is just whipping right down Matagorda Bay. Remember, the coast here is not more south coast, it's more like this, and we're right here, so the winds are coming almost parallel, but they're going to go more north and west. And that's going to help to push the water offshore. We got another high tide later this evening. Low tide occurring at 2:15, so we just had a low tide. Not that we could tell right here on the seawall, but a real battery right now from Beta as we get the fresh water from the atmosphere and the salt water blowing off Matagorda Bay. So, Carl, this is the thick of it. And if you compare it to Lake Charles, and that, major hurricane, gosh, thank goodness it's just a mid-range tropical storm. Everybody here is very, very happy. We saw some folks at lunch, and they were very happy that we came in and just got what we got. They're used to this. In fact, they were saying, a lot of folks were saying they get what they call northers that are worse than this. So they're very happy that they didn't have to deal with a hurricane and just a little street flooding. People had to pull their boats in. Obviously, no fishing today in this big fishing area, but by and large, you're going to get through this in pretty good shape because if winds don't gust much over 50 miles an hour, you really don't get much in the way of very minimal structural damage.
Could have been so much worse if we had been looking at a really humid environment. Mike, thank you. And we can show you what everything looks like from above where he is. So there you see the center of circulation is just about ready to come onshore right now. And you've got some thunderstorm activity near that center. There you see that center a little bit more closely right now. And we'll get an even tighter. So that's Port O'Connor. That's where Mike is on the west edge of Matagorda Bay right in there. And it's not just that he's close to the center, it's also that we're seeing some heavier rain coming right into where he is. So that makes a difference as well, where you've got clearer conditions or at least not rain. You are more likely to leave some of the stronger wind that's aloft up there, whereas when you have a heavy rain band come through, it's more likely to transfer that down to the ground. So that's a big part of why he's getting some really strong wind right now. And more, as we see more of that going through the afternoon, we expect that there's going to be even more strong wind coming into those areas. We've been talking about the water level rises. They have been significant in some areas. It's been an offshore flow in Matagorda Bay and also in Rockport for quite some time now through the day yesterday and today. Sound side flooding in Port O'Connor and Rockport, whereas we're seeing more of an onshore flow farther northeast getting up towards the Galveston Pier. A water level rise of 2 feet right now, and surge alerts are still in effect. Looking at the radar picture right now, we're seeing heavier rain coming into Houston. We've been watching the instability very closely, and that is creeping up, getting more towards Houston. So as that continues to overspread the Houston area, that increases the odds of seeing heavier rainfall rates. And as we look at what's going on in Houston right now, we had a little bit of a break there, some heavier rain near the Katy Freeway, and now some coming up on the east side of town and towards downtown as well. This is what we're going to see more of through the night tonight. Also, waves of rain now along the Gulf Freeway, and another batch coming into Galveston. So from Harris County on southward into Galveston County, Brazoria County, Fort Bend County, broadly what we're looking for is 3 to 4 to 5 inches, but we may see more than that in some isolated areas. And if the rainfall rates are heavy enough, we're going to be looking at some flooding there, perhaps in some of those areas on the south side of town. Also, you notice wet weather extending well to the west and towards Victoria as well. We'll have much more on Tropical Storm Beta coming up in a moment.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
The weather right now has been going downhill in Houston. Some very heavy rain. It has been rather persistent for the past couple of hours in the moderates, what I would call heavy range here in Houston. In fact, let's go right now. With Houston under a tropical storm warning and a flash flood watch, we've been watching some of these clouds just zipping on by some of the taller buildings in downtown Houston. With it, I think it's kind of interesting. The rain has been coming in offshore, coming in kind of from the southeasterly direction, yet what we're seeing here are the upper level, the higher winds, I guess, not upper level, but, upper level on the buildings, kind of going in the northeast. So we're seeing some winds that have been, gusting up to close to 30 miles an hour in the greater Houston area, but nothing compared to what we're seeing on the coast right now. So from where I am right here in Houston to 110 miles or so to the southeast of where I am, Port O'Connor, southwest of where I am, down the coast, is meteorologist Mike Seidel. Mike, we have a soggy condition here, but you have the rain and the wind right now in Port O'Connor.
We got both. We're in the what is the core, or the northwest fringe of the center of Beta. We don't have a true eye wall or an eye, but you get a sense of how hard it's raining, and the wind just whipping the waves here. This is Matagorda Bay, and the visibility has dropped dramatically out here, as we had the wind since yesterday, but nothing like this with this squall. Not on the Gulf of Mexico. To check.
And we are looking live. We were looking live there, Port O'Connor, Texas, where we are awaiting the landfall of Beta. And we will check back in with Mike Seidel as well as Chris Warren in the field in just a few minutes. We want to turn now to the wildfire-ravaged West, where welcome relief is on the way for the Pacific Northwest in the form of rain. But unfortunately, California is going to stay dry. So far this year, more than 3.5 million acres have gone up in smoke. And a short time ago, the governor updated residents on the role the fires and record heat have played in COVID-19 testing rates.
You could see the 7-day average of daily tests now moving back up to where we were pre these wildfires. Again, that heat dome, the heat wave, the wildfires, air quality were impacting our total testing availability in this state. We're starting to see those numbers go back up now, just shy of 124,000 tests, average number of daily tests over the last 7 days. What is very encouraging is you can see that positivity rate, some 3.1% over a 14-day period, 2.8% over a 7-day period. So testing now increasing, positivity rates continue to decrease in the state of California.
And these wildfires are impacting people all throughout the state. In minutes, they can destroy a home. Now, the man you're about to meet lost everything when a wildfire swept onto his property. But what makes Bob Lipkin's story even more devastating is that he watched it all happen on video, powerless to stop it. He's telling his remarkable story to the Weather Channel's Justin Michaels.
It's hard to imagine living through a wildfire. Even harder still to imagine losing your house. But can you imagine having the video of it burning? Welcome to the reality of Bob Lipkin.
The way a fire can sweep through somebody from nothing to gone in 7 minutes. It's crazy.
This is the video caught on a small security camera in Bob's front window.
Somebody gave me this little cheap $25, $35 camera that I'd stuck up in a window, and it was hooked to Wi-Fi.
It rolled, capturing every detail. Now, it's important to note, this video is not sped up. This is the North Complex wildfire in Berry Creek, California in real time. The trees in Bob's front yard were 100 feet tall. The flames, even taller.
I mean, literally, I could hardly watch it. I was shaking so much.
A friend of Bob's is a firefighter and sent him these photographs, before and after.
We have a 7-foot bronze grizzly, Mad Max, standing in our front door, and he was still standing. And the 2 stone pillars that held up the carport to the house were still standing. We're going to keep those there.
Now, Bob knows it's going to be a long road before they can ever get back to the property. So he keeps a mantra in his mind he's lived by for all of his 76 years.
I've got a saying that attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. And the only difference, that. I'm trying to keep a good attitude.
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
Well, for more on wildfire coverage as well as the updates on the tropics, you can check out Pattern Storm Break on Snapchat. And in the West, we've had over 1 million acres burned so far in Oregon. And look at this, Oregon and in Washington state, we are going to have some much needed rain coming in here as we look towards middle of the week. Here's the storm moving in from the Gulf of Alaska and the Pacific. When does it happen? Well, for Oregon and Washington, looks like starting Wednesday, this storm will start to move in. The European model shows rain picks up as we head into Wednesday afternoon, overnight and into Thursday. In Oregon, we're likely looking at 1 to 2 inches right along the coast west of the mountains. For parts of northwestern Washington, we could be looking at locally 3 inches plus. Now, on the other side of the break, brand new update just in on Tropical Storm Beta from the Hurricane Center. Stick with us.
Watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Tropical Storm Beta. Now just off the coast, it's going to make landfall north of here, but we're getting the core, or what is the core. Again, this is not your classic tropical storm. We had so much dry air and wind shear, which is the saving grace. Both factors held this back from becoming a hurricane and doing any more damage than it's done, which has been basically a storm surge story in towns including Freeport, Surfside Beach, Galveston. We've seen the pictures of streets underwater, and we've got some streets underwater here, at least earlier today when we had high tide through the morning and we had a storm surge topping out at 3.2 feet. But right now, the latest breaking from the National Hurricane Center, Carl Parker, the 5 p.m. Eastern advisory on Beta, and I did notice it's actually slowed down again.
Now moving northwest at 5 miles per hour, so just a very slow drift towards the coast. 45 mile per hour winds right now, and about 25 miles southeast of Port O'Connor, which is where Mike is. Now, we also have the new forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center, and there's been no large-scale change in the thinking here. The storm is going to continue to drift towards the coast, but at some point it's going to start to move out more towards the northeast and slowly move along along the coast, maybe just a little offshore at some point there along the upper Texas coast and towards Lake Charles, and then come up to Louisiana and Mississippi. But it will be in a very weakened state by that time, so it's primarily just going to be a rain threat, and that's really the most of what we're looking for tonight. We're expecting that there is going to be wind and certainly some elevated water level along the coast, but heavy rain is what's got us most concerned about the storm right now. You notice here that as this rain is coming into southeast Texas, you see the area of red and orange there. That is instability. So that has been slowly creeping in from the coast and moving a little farther inland. And as it does so, that's going to allow these storms to have more punch, the rainfall rates to be heavier. And so certainly we expect to see a lot of rain coming into the Houston area through the rest of the day today. And I want you to notice also, you've got wet weather all across the metro, Harris County and on southward, down the Southwest Freeway into Brazoria County. But then you've got this feed of moisture, this band that is driving up and towards Houston. If that doesn't move that much over the next few hours and we get very heavy rainfall rates within that, we certainly could be looking at some more substantial flooding there. So here's a look at the rain still to come. And you see a broad area of 3 to 5 inches. That's in the yellow. So that covers parts of Chambers County into Galveston County, the southern half of Harris County, so Houston, and on southward there down 288, down the 59 freeway and along the Katy freeway as well. And then also much of Brazoria County, pretty sizable area of more than 5 inches in orange there in Brazoria County. And then we see the 3 to 5 in Fort Bend County as well. So primarily it seems that it's going to be from I-10 on southward where we see the heaviest amounts of rain. But certainly that could affect downtown Houston, surrounding areas, the 610 loop there, all the surrounding freeways and their feeder roads, which do tend to fill up a lot more easily. So just be aware of that. And when you look at the model forecast, you see that the rain continues well into this evening. So that's taking it through 10 o'clock tonight, and we're still seeing rain there in Houston. And that's a big part of why we are so concerned about flash flooding. It's finally then going to begin to move on. This model showing it a little farther inland, may not go quite that far inland, maybe closer to the coast. Here you see the visible satellite picture, and we still see this big swirl in the clouds. A lot of momentum here, and that has been piling up the water. So we've still got surge to tell you about. It is a sound side surge in Port O'Connor as well as in Rockport. It is coming in from the Gulf farther north with an easterly wind up into Galveston. 2.2 feet there at the Galveston Pier and 2.4 feet at the railroad bridge. And so we are still seeing some minor to moderate flooding along the coast. And there you see the storm surge warning that is in effect along much of the upper Texas coast. And so, Mike, as that center comes on shore or very close to it, maybe it just drifts along the shore for a while, it's going to be a prolonged period of wind and elevated surf there. It's going to be just a difficult night, but certainly could have been a lot worse if we had not seen so much dry air across the state.
Oh my gosh, by all means. And yes, you mentioned the elevated surf and the beach erosion out on the barrier islands like Aransas. Those areas that got hit hard. Remember just a few years ago by Harvey, that major hurricane, and we were there earlier this year. Cristobal did a number on the beach. So yes, we're going to lose sand certainly there and all the way up towards the Matagorda Beach. And look at the water coming, this seawater, salt water from Matagorda Bay. Remember, the Gulf is out that way. We've got a barrier, so that's saving us from getting, 10, 12, 13-foot waves. With that said, they're crashing on the seawall right here as Beta makes its approach. 5 miles an hour now. Mike Bettis, Jackie Jarris, and I'll be back with you coming up here at 5 Eastern. More analysis and forecast with Beta on the Weather Channel.
Next on Weather Underground, live coverage of Tropical Storm Beta. This system moments away from a Texas landfall with bands of thunderstorms, coastal flooding, and gusty winds already arriving in advance. And we're going to take you live to the coast where the threat of heavy rain and flooding could last for days even after Beta rolls ashore.
And chilly fall temperatures invading much of the east and causing some problems along the coast. Find out why the same system that's bringing those temperatures down is combining with a hurricane about 800 miles away to fuel coastal flooding and wash over the roads. Plus, the latest from the ongoing crisis in the West, where deadly wildfires continue to rage, but there's potential good news for one area that's hit hard. That's next on Weather Underground.
Welcome in, everyone. It's a Monday edition of Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris. We're with you until 9 o'clock Eastern time tonight as we continue to track Tropical Storm Beta, which is swirling out there over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Mike, it's this close to the coast, but it's still crawling.
Yeah, you're right. It just maybe, you know, during the show tonight, you're going to see a landfall here in Texas, but the images, Jackie, certainly already are frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been seeing this since early yesterday for sure. The city of Galveston now underwater tonight, and that's thanks to high tide and the onshore push of water from Tropical Storm Beta. So our 5 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Central Time advisory is in, and we want to bring you the latest information now on Beta, which remains a tropical storm with maximum winds around 45 miles per hour. It's been holding pretty steady there for today. It's weakened since yesterday due to some of that dry air, which has been training into the system, and it makes it really disorganized, and the impacts are really spread out with this thing as well. It's moving northwest at 5 miles per hour. So if you do the math, we're 25 miles away from Port O'Connor. Take us about 5 hours to get there if our speed does not change. We're hoping it will pick up a little bit in forward speed. In the meantime, tropical storm warnings are remaining in effect. Those tropical storm conditions are already there. We're feeling all the impacts with the gusty winds from time to time. We've been getting heavy rainfall as well. And then we've got the storm surge, and that's really been the biggest issue, I think, widespread into coastal areas of Texas, into Louisiana. We've even been seeing that a little bit east of there. Here's a look at its current position, and we've had some pretty heavy rain today, kind of sandwiched in between Galveston Bay and over towards Port O'Connor. And this is going to be the main feed in that main area that we're going to have to watch over the next couple of hours for the heaviest rainfall totals, as the rain's been pretty hefty. We've got some lightning showing up here on the map as well. We've seen about 1 to 2 inches pretty widespread here just since this morning, and we could see an additional inch to as much as 4 inches before all is said and done. Corpus Christi, you've got some moderate rain showers. This is all pushing in from the north for you. And then southeastern Louisiana, boy, Grand Isle, you've been getting some of that rainfall. The heavy stuff is offshore, but that's trying to work its way northward here for tonight. The surge has definitely been an issue. Magnolia Beach reporting flooding of roads near Washington Boulevard and Maple Street there. And then over here into the Jones Creek area, Texas Department of Emergency Management reporting storm surge inundation there. All roads are impassable that are south of County Road 201. So it really gives you an idea, you know, that water is there, and we're seeing surge around 1 to 3 feet in some of these spots. So that slow crawl still continuing here, Mike, and it will take its sweet time even into tomorrow, moving across parts of Texas. Finally should pick up a little bit more forward speed once it gets into the lower Mississippi River Valley. But, you know, that's why we still have that big rainfall potential here, because it's just crawling.
Seems like every system this year, you know, is taking at least a week to finally get out of our hair. This may be the same. Well, Weather Channel meteorologist Mike Seidel monitoring conditions along the Texas Gulf Coast there, joining us from Port O'Connor. Mike, that thing is just off the coast right now. Obviously, the conditions have gotten significantly worse today than they were yesterday.
Oh, by far. Yesterday we started out, it was sunny and breezy, dew point about 60, temperature in the upper 70s. And that's one of the keys, Mike. We've been talking about this, the saving grace, in addition to the wind shear. There was so much dry air coming down with that cool high that's brought the record cold this morning in the Northeast, temperatures below freezing. And all that dry air worked into Texas over the late week and over the weekend and staved off the development. Yesterday we saw the Beta, Tropical Storm Beta develop, blow up convection. We thought, uh-oh, here it goes. We've seen this time and time again this season, but it was not to be. The dry air came in and said, nuh-uh, ain't happening. Thank goodness, because we could have been dealing with a hurricane. As it is, we've got now a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm, so a kind of a lower-end tropical storm. You can see on the radar the squall, the band that came by. That's the northwest side of the circulation. We don't have an eye, and we don't have really an eye wall, but this band that came through is about as strong as we're going to see as far as the combination of wind and rain from Beta. So far, the rain gauge here in Port O'Connor at 93/100ths of an inch. We do have the flash flood watch continuing into Tuesday evening for this part of the Texas coast, and then all the way up to Houston and Galveston. Now, we've had higher rainfall totals between Galveston and Surfside. Surfside's had about 2 inches. Some of the rain gauges, Jamaica Beach up towards the south end of Galveston, have had upwards of 2 to 3 inches of rain. They had that line coming in earlier. So right now, about an inch of rain it's moving on through, so that really lowers the threat for flash flooding. Let's hope it stays that way. We still have the surge issue. We had a surge this morning of 3.2 feet. Now the water's up about, last check I think it was about 2 to 2.5. Tide is low about an hour or so ago. It'll start coming back in, another high tide tonight. But you can see the wave action. And I want to remind you, this is not the Gulf of Mexico. This is Matagorda Bay. You've got to go out there. You can't see it. The visibility's too low. The barrier island. And out there, we've got Matagorda Beach to the north, Port Aransas to the south, where we were for Cristobal. And those beaches, I can guarantee you, are seeing significant erosion, a battering of the waves. At least Port Aransas has a very solid dune line. Matagorda Beach is pretty flat, so no doubt there's water in the parking lot there at Matagorda Beach. So we're going to be watching the wave action, and this is going to be a slow process to wind down, Mike, because the system now is moving 5 miles an hour. Now, granted, once the center finally gets inland, it'll continue, the wind field will wind down because we have a pretty broad wind field, as we've seen gusts over 40 in the state of Louisiana. So we're going to be dealing with this kind of action in the bays and out in the Gulf for a while, precluding any good fishing for at least the next couple of days here in the central Gulf Coast of Texas.
Mike, I wanted to ask you again about, this. I know we don't have a particularly strong storm right now, but it's very persistent. So which areas in particular? I know you mentioned Port Aransas there, Matagorda. What other areas you think up toward maybe even, the Louisiana state line could be affected by, coastal erosion?
Well, certainly, the advantage in Louisiana is we don't have much in the way of beaches. We have the Cameron Parish situation. Of course, that's a whole different story. Those poor folks still without water and electricity after Hurricane Laura. But you're talking along the Texas coast, Galveston Island, the Bolivar Peninsula. Remember, that was just about leveled by Ike back in 2008. And then you come down to Surfside Beach, Jamaica Beach, and Matagorda Beach. Next stop down, you've got Port Aransas, and then you get over to North Padre. That's across the bridge from Corpus, and then South Padre. So you get down there, you've got less wind, and the wind's offshore. But in these areas, we're also getting the waves battering the Gulf Coast. And again, this is not directly coming in from the Gulf. We've got the break with that barrier island out there, so we're not getting the 8, 10, 12-foot waves and the higher surf. Remember, the waves are imposed on that surge, which here at Matagorda Bay was 3.2. By the way, I checked the wind gauge, which is where they measure the water level, and so far peak gusts 42 miles an hour. I would have guessed a little bit higher, but then again, we've got a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm, so maybe it just felt like that out here when you've got the rain and the salt water coming at you horizontally.
All right, Mike Seidel for us tonight. He is in Port O'Connor, Texas. Could be the spot that we see, the center of this thing come ashore over the next few hours. We're certainly going to get you up to date on what's happening currently. Back with Mike frequently here over the course of the show tonight. Very weak steering currents out there, so this is why it's kind of drifted slowly here over the past couple of days. Not much to it with a ton of dry air, almost going all the way around it at this point, but certainly it's been there on the west and southern side for most of the day today and part of yesterday as well. A little bit of wind shear has gotten into that as well, so you look at it, but it's not a very healthy looking system, and the winds have come down since yesterday even. The steering flow hasn't really been there. Sure, this high pressure has nudged it just a little bit to the west, but really that drifts south a little bit, weakens a little bit with a really strong flow is up here to the north here, and I'm sure you've noticed with the front that came through significantly cooler air and a little wind for you in the eastern half of the country. All right, so potentially, sitting at a landfall tonight or just hugging the coast tonight, and then over the course of the next few days, eventually makes its way across the southeast up toward the Tennessee Valley here. But that's not, look at this, even with, say, a Birmingham and a Memphis, Friday, it's Monday, folks. So that's how long it's going to take it to get there. But we think that probably by, sometime Thursday morning, it's mostly out of our hair in Texas, but that's another 3 days before it's gone, right? You take a look at what the model tracks are doing. Again, short term, they just kind of all sit right here around where Mike Seidel is in Port O'Connor. Then eventually, there's going to be a little breakdown in that ridge, and there's going to be a little avenue, we think, for this thing to push its way off to the northeast here. But through time, it's just going to be a while, and so we're going to be dealing with persistent gusts. We're going to be dealing with persistent rain. There's that high pressure now weakening, sliding south a little bit, low pressure to the north. There it is. If the low's sitting here, there's a little escape route right through there between the two, okay? And so that generally is where the models are predicting it to go. And as the low lifts out and the high pushes off to the east, there's more opportunity for it to just follow along with both of them. So it may be a few days, Jackie, but we think at least at the end of the tunnel, there's light at the end of the tunnel here, and a significantly weaker system pushing through the northeast and increasing forward speed. Those are positives.
Yeah, we need the forward speed so the rain doesn't pile up and cause flooding issues. Rain bands from Beta already arrived in Texas more than 24 hours ago, and we've seen reports of widespread flooding in the Port O'Connor area. Our crews got stuck in this downpour earlier this morning. So as of just this morning, you've had about an inch in Port O'Connor, and we've seen amounts ranging from about 1 to 3 inches today. The highest number I could find was in Brazoria, Texas, and you've had just over 3 inches of rainfall. But when your storm system just isn't moving a whole heck of a lot, that provides a lot of opportunity to keep that moisture working its way on the shore. But our system is really disorganized, and so we're not seeing all the rain concentrated in one place. It's kind of spread out all over the place, and that's actually helping out a little bit right now. It's a pretty broad system, and those tropical storm force winds extend out about 175 miles from the center of the storm. So we get that onshore flow that pulls in the moisture and can help to bring some of those heavier amounts of rain. So parts of Louisiana, just over an inch of rainfall so far, but there you can see Doppler radar just south and west of Galveston, radar estimating about 4 inches of rainfall in that particular spot. So localized flash flooding is certainly on the table, and that's going to be an issue moving forward over the next couple of days, especially into the Texas coast where the system just kind of sits there and spins. Port Lavaca, Bay City, up towards Houston to the Galveston area. That's the spot where it's most likely to occur between now and the early morning hours for tomorrow. In fact, we're seeing some radar trends that's going to continue to be the sweet spot, and we couldn't rule out 3, 4, even 5 inches of rainfall just in some of those heavier bands that are working their way into the region right now. Now, as we head through tomorrow, it's not just southeastern Texas, it's still parts of Louisiana that we're going to be watching, and eventually that moisture will work its way northward. Still seeing some of those discrepancies, though, between the GFS and the Euro. The Euro is certainly a little bit more bullish with the rainfall amounts. I think 3 to 5 is a good number to have in mind for sure, Mike, but locally heavier amounts certainly can't be ruled out.
Yeah, interesting to see the huge differences between the two when it comes to rainfall, and it's such an important forecast too, right? Let's break down for you then locally what we think could happen for you. So let's see the bands here in Houston, Galveston, up around, say, Freeport and Katy. We could be dealing with some stronger bands as we go through the night tonight. And they're probably just going to be off and on over the course of the next 2 to 3 days here. Lunchtime tomorrow, still more storms around. Drive time tomorrow, still more storms around. Right now, 3 to 4 inches, a pretty good bet. Some localized amounts, could be a little bit more than that. Could be a few, pockets in there where you're going to get slightly higher amounts. But overall, again, if we can spread this out over the course of the next 2 to 3 days, we should be able to minimize the risk of flooding. All right, let's take you to the Arklatex now. Texarkana here, Shreveport sitting right in here. We also will be on the receiving end of some heavy rain. Initially, not that bad. And then as the system itself gets a little bit closer and edges your direction, that's when the bands will start to pick up in intensity and frequency here, and there could be some opportunities for flooding. Again, it could be localized amounts that could be heavy at times, but 2 inches, for the most part, should be manageable for us here. Lake Charles, we're still recovering after Hurricane Laura. And unfortunately, we've just got more rain in your forecast. Could go on for days. Unfortunately, may just hamper your recovery efforts and cleanup that's going on for you right now. But over the course of the next few days here, going all the way through Wednesday evening, roughly 2 inches expected to come our way here in southern Louisiana. Jackie?
Well, Mike, the onshore flow from Beta also causing rising waters, flooding out roads in southeastern parts of Texas, including into neighborhoods. The rising storm surge, certainly a big threat when it comes to Tropical Storm Beta, and we've been seeing that for well over 24 hours now. The water level rise is only kind of ranging between about that 1 and 3 foot mark, but it's just enough to cover up the roads, cause erosion problems, and